o tukashila o kantanka, namako ambetu le e wazi o plakinkdilo. Ukuji ala wa onta ya ama pleasant yo. Mi waka patahan we yang namaji o we chayaka cheki onta ya ho ana makopte ye. Let me daku ye yankapi keep opta ya tuka wachinkdilo. Le unki piki ho hewashtelo. Tiokasi chetanzi wiki pahami chaje oyate toka he wichakie. Tashunke wanagi. My name is Tiokasin Ghosthorse. I am from the Itatzip Chola and Minikoju Lakota people. And I come from the Cheyenne River Lakota Reservation in South Dakota. I presently live in the Catskills, and I host a radio program, First Voices Radio, that is heard on 120 stations, FM, AM, analog, around the nation and the world, and talks about first voices, not the second or third or fourth, or just living on reservations, but the first voices here before everyone showed up. And this is the root of this country. And so in this way, in my language, the most I can translate to you is that we're here to hear the words of the earth, not the anthropocentric view of only human to human, thinking that because we can save the earth with the same language, that is destroying it. In other words, what I like to say is that we cannot awaken someone or anyone who's pretending to be awake, because we're using the same language and we become loopers. And loopers means that the same logic is applied to something that has not been, it's fairly new. And with that, I think it's a point of discussion that we'll be talking about with Connor. And I'm sure Connor has much to introduce to you about himself. And that's the best I can do in introducing myself in a traditional way in Old Lakota. And I tried this. So I go home and I talk about myself. I did this and I do that and I graduated this and I do this and I, me. And in that traditional way, the old people would be sitting there and they would just start laughing, because that's not our way to talk about ourselves. So it's in a way, it's difficult to talk about myself in front of you all, because then we're leaving everybody else out. And I'll talk to you about that later, but I want you to introduce Connor. I just met him about half an hour ago or so. So thank you, Connor.
Connor Ryan, Amichape, Iche Wichasha Mielo, Itan Heska. So I said to you all there in some Lakota that's not quite as good as Uncle's here, is my name's Connor Ryan. I'm Lakota, and I'm a common man, and I come from Heska, or as it's known on your maps, the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. For me, I'm a professional skier and a filmmaker and an advocate for people and for places, and above all else for our interconnectedness. I feel really privileged to have the lens of skiing to have been the thing to really inspire my reconnection to the land. For me, I come from the city. I was born and raised in the Denver and Boulder area, the Front Range of Colorado. And I come from a couple generations of the forced disconnection and assimilation of our people. I didn't have the ability to grow up close to our cultural ways where I lived. In fact, for most all of my life, I was usually the only Native person in the room, the only Native person in school, and the only Native person that I had to look to was my mom, who was a single mother, and she was raised in Compton and Watts. in Los Angeles. And, her father, my grandfather, was taken at a very young age from the reservation, and he was put in a boarding school in St. Louis. And from that boarding school at 14 years old, he was put into the Navy, where he was a prisoner of war. And he came back from that war, from World War II, and spent most of his life in and out of incarceration, in and out of addiction. And so we didn't have that ability to grow up close to our language, to our culture. But it was skiing that pulled me back in. When I was 21 years old, the first time I was able to purchase a ski pass was the first fall that I went back to the Black Hills. And there I met some uncles who fortunately lived just in my same neck of the woods, and I never knew were there, who pulled me into ceremony, who pulled me into the culture. But for the first time, I was able to make meaning of so many of the projections that had been projected onto me in my life of, you're a Native American, you're Lakota, you should be this, you should be that. My stepdad growing up, his favorite movie was Dances with Wolves. And so he would put that on and he would say, that's you, that's your mom. And I was like, I'm 10 years old playing pee-wee football. Like, what do you mean that's me? But it was through skiing for the first time that I was able to really start to perceive my interconnectedness to the land. And so much of my work now is to share that with other people, and at the same time, to be able to bring other Native American youth in particular into the sport of skiing and back into the space of the outdoors, which has always been our domain before its commodification and before its colonization and our removal from it. So it's a really special opportunity to be able to share with you today. And it's a really special opportunity to be able to share and receive with you, Tiokasin. So I'm really excited for what's ahead of us here.
Wow, I was just noticing how tall he is. I'm like, okay, but then again, we were talking earlier. I said, I have two nephews that are younger than he is, and they're 7'2". And I'm thinking, I'm the shortest in my family, and I used to be 6'3", and I shrunk an inch, right? You get that way. All my discs, kind of my back, anyway. So he's tall, right? And I'm thinking about, wow, that's how the Lakota people are. We're tall because we have so much in the plains. If you've been out in the plains, and you can see vast distances. And so I think that's where the classic pose came, because the Lakota were doing that. And we can see hawks like miles away in the sky. It's like 20/20 vision. Even now, I just took my driver's test the last month for this month, and I went through in New York, and they gave me the driver's eye test, and 20/20. I'm like, wow, this is cool. I can see a hawk, but I can't see right here. So that reading, so I have to wear glasses all the time. But I was noticing that because we're tall, the classic pose was the Indian looking out like this. And that's where that comes from, because we see that, and knowing what the stereotypes were, and Connor kind of alluded to a little bit, Dances with Wolves, that's something Hollywood, right? And so I'm thinking about the younger generations and how all that I heard today, like, wow, this was 30, 40 years ago. I teach at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and I've taught at Yale and Columbia and places like that. So I understand the sort of nature rhetoric is because we in our language don't have a word for nature. We refuse it. And I heard we are nature, we are part nature, nature this. And if we don't have a word for nature, then what is it? So I spent that many decades trying to hear it, and not as a separation, but I figured it out. It's okay. We are becoming earth. We are becoming, when we're born, we are becoming earth. And when we die, we are becoming earth. So it's all in motion. And to go back to the language, Connor, is that there is no, I heard a lot of I and me and my and mine and our statements. Think about this. But in the old Lakota, those words don't exist. I, me, my, mine, and ours. Now, why don't they exist? I hear a lot of our earth, our land, our state, our, and all this time I'm hearing the ancestors of this land trying to wait and like being very, very, very patient with that type of mentality to actually heal itself. And growing up without toys, not that we were poor, we didn't have running water. This was in the 50s and 60s. But we had, you call it access to nature. That doesn't fit. Like, what is that? But if you grow up with it, you have your horses, you have the land, you have all of those things presenting itself to you. And when they're presenting itself to you, what do you do but recognize and acknowledge that? And I'd like to say the part of our awareness, ableza, is kind of like when you go to nature, you go to the park, you go to whatever, permit access to nature that you say, that doesn't ring true for Native. Like, what is that? What is access to nature? Like we've been away from it. So another way to think about this is also, we can't go to nature. We can't go to the park for the weekend. We can't go to those places because the simple fact that the language that we speak, Lakota, asking respectfully for the love, centering, focusing Lakota on the knowledge of the stars. And when we say that, we're recognizing ourselves in the motion of the cosmology. And when Connor describes his skiing and what he's done as a young man that he is, 30, he said, like, oh man, he's got more than half of his life to live. You know, so what is it? The language. We come from the heart. We come from nature. We don't go to nature. So we don't journey from here to the heart for our languages. We always come from nature instead of going to the heart. You see what I mean? The dichotomy is very distancing. So we say the earth, that nature, and we separate ourselves already. The nature, the earth. How about just saying earth? And try to form the language, even this language of English, which is a foreign language, by the way. Is that not true? Yes. So how is that language going to understand this land? If it tends to push us onto reservations, it doesn't recognize, but acknowledges us, land acknowledgement. But I'm saying it's much more than land acknowledgement. We used to be here. No, we're here. We're watching. We've been watching you all. So in my studies, I've gone through anthropology, about cultural anthropology, about Native people, Indians, and whatever. And I turned it around and said, okay, I'm studying white people. What do you think, Connor?
I love that. I think that's really accurate of what I've come to embrace and feel. That separation from nature, I think, is the one thing for me as I've grown up. I remember being in school and having this feeling of feeling really different from everybody, but not being very good at how to put my finger on it. And I think a lot of that came from being on the edge of my homelands and the spirits whispering that to me. Of like, these things. I remember I had the opportunity my senior year of high school, you could take this class where they would teach you how to balance a checkbook and do all these things that were supposed to, be these life skills. And I remember looking at things like that all throughout my upbringing and being like, paying taxes, balancing a checkbook. I don't think those are the life skills that I have that urge to understand. But I had this urge of curiosity for so many other other places. And I think the place where I felt that the most was when my mom, she was very adamant about us free playing out on the land, out in the woods. And that for me was a place where my curiosity could take hold and my mind could just get lost amongst all that. And, we were just in that green prescription workshop up there. And it really had me thinking about that being kind of our natural state for our minds. And this feeling for me of, they talk about now, people being afraid of nature. And for me, I feel like it's sometimes the only place I actually do feel safe. And that is in the indoors and the conditioning to it that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I think when you look around a room like this, and obviously this hula place is a beautiful creation, and the intention of what everyone seeks to bring forth here really emanates. But I think there's an unavoidable truth wherever we are in this human creation that is a reflection of that disconnection, right? And why we have this lack of reflection of ourselves to say not to see ourselves as nature or to see nature as something separate, because this is wood right here, right? These were chan oyate, standing ones, the relatives right here, but now they're this wall, right? And you look at the ground and it's beautiful, right? There's these crushed rocks in there, but these rocks were also grandfathers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years old, with stories to tell that have been participating in these ecological cycles that we participate in so deeply, right? The bones that you're made of, is the minerals carried off the rocks through the water into your being. You digest that, you take that in, and it becomes you. And so I think it becomes really hard at a certain point to identify that sacredness of all those other things over time. And so that's something that sits heavy on me. And so as you speak in Lakota, I think there's ways in the language to me that just feel, it feels like there's a closing of that distance when the language is spoken, because it's a language that was never set up to define things as separate. And I think as I look at the world and as we look at these solutions that we come together to present and to share with one another, to me that is always the thing that it can be hard to identify a solution in anything that still acknowledges that separation. And yet for me, I'm not a fluent Lakota speaker, and English is all I've known. And so there's this feeling, I think, sometimes of just a real yearning to want to understand, what it was like to grow up with that language as a first language, and how it is to perceive things first in that wholeness, as opposed to perceive things, only from that place of separation and only getting pieces of that wholeness. So.
No, that's a good way to lead into this thought, and probably you'll take it from here. Is so if I was to go deeper into the language and get very visceral about it, if I think about how my 89-year-old mother was born in 1934, and that time of no fences and no cars, and they were adapting to the earth, and then she had to go to a place where everybody was adapting earth to their needs. And she thought it was very wrong. And she went into the Western culture society, and they were adapting earth to their needs everywhere. Digging up, extracting, moving, defining it, putting in books, measuring. And she said, I hurt here. And just recently, 3-4 years ago, I asked her, she said to me, so I was trying to find some definition in the Lakota language for a certain word or feeling. And she says, son, we cannot speak Lakota. It's a 200,000-year-old language. and try to put it into a 5,000-year-old language of English or Latin. The Latin, French, Italian, all the Latin language-based Romance languages. So she said that we cannot speak Lakota without intuition. Now think about that. We cannot speak it without intuition. Now how does that feel to you all? Because when he described cha, which is tree or wood, I immediately went to this. Cha is the same way we start. He started out, he said, Chante washte napechu zapielo. Chante. Cha is tree, and that refers to our heart. We have no word for heart. It refers to our heart, cha. Te is like living. So you're describing in verbs living treeing, because you look at it, it goes out into your nerves, your brain, and you have a tree going on. And so the language is the reason why I say she said it was intuitive, because if we could take this language that we're speaking now and verbatize it, in other words, making verbs by taking I, me, my, mine, and out, or ours out of it, and you'll have to start understanding the feeling, the expression, because the reason why we can't translate into English, because English doesn't have expression. And if you're talking this environmental language, which is kind of silly, and you're trying to apply that to Earth, it's always going to be that you need a fence or a measurement for it. And you're going to base it on science. And in that, so in that way, like we say Wakantanka, in translation in English to a lot of colonial Native people, they say, oh, that's the great spirit, the great mystery. But no, it's deeper than that. Wakantanka, Wakan, Wa is energy. Purity, excuse me. Ka is energy. When you put that together, it comes out this way. To consciously apply mystery to everything. And your word is God. But we can't think dogmatically, because we need a relational language in order to feel the intuition of all that we say is dead or alive in this language. But everything has consciousness, and we've always known this. So this consciousness cannot be contained by conscience, which is, am I saying or the right word, or am I making the right test score? Am I putting it back in the box that has linear time, beginning and ending? It has superior, inferior. It also has cause and effect. So it's basically a parabox. And we're feeding that box because we only learn how to be extractive in our thinking. But in Lakota, there is no box. We are spatial people, beings. And when I speak English and educated in the West, I have to be very careful not to educate the wisdom out of myself. Oh. And so I'm speaking in temporal terms now, because we understand measurement and concepts. So if you go into the verb-based languages, there is less concept. And you're free-flowing with the tree and whatnot. So,
yeah. I wonder, as you shared that, something that I've tried to convey over the years when people ask me about, like, what is the real difference of the indigenous worldview versus this colonial worldview, something that I've come back to over and over is that undefined quality, if that makes sense. And for me, I was raised in a Christian household. When I got in trouble in public school, they sent me to a Christian school, to try and straighten me out better. And my mom, she did the best that she could. And there's a lot of things that I learned that I'm grateful for in that space. But I think what I quickly became at odds with, I think, starting in the Christian school and then throughout science and through these other things, was that it felt to me like in the Western worldview, things were ultimately like they move from a position of things being known, as opposed to things being generally unknown. And as I got older and more mature, I felt like that was the shift that I found in myself, was that like the more I knew was really the growing awareness of what I didn't know. And so I just wonder if you could speak a little more to that that contrast between the two, and what you think that does for, I think, like the people as a whole, and where we find our place in the world.
No, that's a good one. Thank you for that question. I get often that is asked of me. So I'll start with, well, I hope I don't lose my thought here. Anthropocentricity is non-existent in Lakota. So how do I deal with that when I'm teaching, or tomorrow I have to go back to New York and teach learners? And one of the things that I will be talking about is, look, you can learn and memorize anything you want and go to the computer and Google, or, my day was encyclopedia, and you can write, and you just, then you take your test and you're approved and you're stamped, oh, he knows, she knows something, right? Then you gather your information and knowledge, and you're given a piece of paper saying that you know something, and you take the little tassel and go this way, right? And then you go out and get your job, right? So I took my 3 degrees. My first one, I burned it. My 2, I went and buried it underneath a tree, and I said, maybe this will change the climate. Nothing has happened. So here's how I would say to this question you asked, Connor, is I don't want you to know my knowledge at all. Forget it. I don't want you to know my information at all. Forget that. Everything is changing anyway. I want to be in rhythm. I want to tell you, or I want you to know, see, this is the words. I want you to know what I'm thinking. I want you to feel what I'm thinking now. So it's having a non-present phobic language. Are we speaking a present phobic language? But here's what we're going to create. We're going to build back bigger, badder, better. That, from an Indigenous perspective, I can't speak for all, but for me, it's like, well, yeah, that sounds like Columbus. They're coming here to lay their plan. And we, as View from the Shore people, are welcoming, but then we get overrun and all the ships are still coming. They're still coming. The idea is that we can make things better because of where did they come from? Something that was going on thousands of years before arriving here. Maybe it's looking at those roots that we're just playing the symptoms out in Americana of what happened there. Maybe it's looking at, can we really save the earth? Can you? When she's actually doing that herself? So you see, we make ourselves even smarter than Earth, which we know that we are not. Earth is more intelligent than any AI can ever come up with. So how do we do that? It's not ritual or ceremony, but again, it's what am I thinking? What am I feeling from you? Am I really understanding your heart first? Nasula. Nasula means my 4-year-old daughter, back in 1992, she was 4 years old. And I was doing my first radio program, and Dad, you're always talking about Earth this and Mother Earth that, and Mother Earth, and she's 4 years old talking this way. I'm like, who raised this child, right? And she said, Dad, you're always talking about Mother Earth. So if Mother Earth is our mother, who's Mother Earth's mother? And of course, me being a father, not wanting to have the answer for her, I said, let's wait on that a little bit. And I called my mom. It's the right thing to do, right? Like, my daughter. And anyway, and she said one word. She said Nasula. And Nasula in Lakota basically means that this, from the top to our vitals. In detail, it means that this head, this brain that we think intelligence comes from, it's merely a seed of the heart. So we're seeding from the heart. But the way the Western education is, intelligence is up here. And that's why the language is least expressive. So it is not, it's saying that, see, I can convey this to you, but it takes so many words when I can say Nasula and I know that expression, I feel it. The trees feel it. Because all of our parts are named after nature. So we know the medicines to go to intuitively. So that's how I'd kind of answer your question there. We're going everywhere, aren't we? And I like that. Then that means we're not linear people. That the answers are coming from any place, any point. Because those points are acknowledging us as messengers. Now take the I, me, my, mine, and out of your diction and start from that point. And you see how childlike we are.
I love the simplicity that kind of returns when we're given the space to just like feel and to see and to be seen. And I think about this thing a lot because, I guess because of two reasons. I think as a Native American, as a Lakota in particular, I'm often getting these same requests over and over, and I'm sure you've got them throughout your life, which is often like, sometimes I want to share something very specific and tangible about, how to support our communities, how our communities can rebuild and build our sovereignty again, and these things. And very often, instead I'm asked to share about my spirituality. And this, share a prayer or share a prayer song or whatever it is. And it's not that I'm uncomfortable sharing that, but I always find this humor in being asked to do a prayer, or now the more common one is being asked to do a land acknowledgement. And I find these funny juxtaposition between these two. And I just wonder if you could elaborate on me a little more with your knowledge of the language, because I have an uncle. My uncle Little Bob's always telling me, check ya to pray. Yeah. But in reality, he says, it means more like to acknowledge. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that line of what is the discernment between those two things, and what is that difference between an acknowledgement and a prayer, and how does that relate to our purpose?
Oh man, this guy here. Okay, I have a question to ask you after.
All right.
I don't know what it is, but I'll ask you. Right? So, it'll come. So wachekia would mean to actually acknowledge relationship, to recognize relationship, because there is no word for prayer in our language. It's acknowledging relationship to everything. And you recognize that, and it recognizes you back. So I think part of that is understanding the language. And we can do this, because I'm going to describe this. It took me many years and some phone calls back to Pine Ridge in South Dakota and asking for elders, which is no word either, but who were born last century. I was born last century, so I say that I'm old. And I say, Standing Rock was about water is life, water is life. Okay. But really, mni wichoni, it's just MNI, to use the alphabet, MNI. And here's how we kind of have to take it apart in order to really say it. The MNI, the E, it's like we don't have a word for water. Why? The MNI is MNI. The I is E. The Ni is living. So I is voicing, Ni is living, and is that which is in relationship between you and I and all things. So how do we put that together? Mini. So the voicing, the living relationship between you and I and all things. And that's our word for water, without saying water. So you see, these languages are ancient because you have relationship, you have experience with them. They're not concepts of application. You write this EIS proposal up, and then we apply that, and we ask the government for help, and they send money, and then all of a sudden we go on to the next project. And so, you described your way of growing up in a society that, you probably could feel the difference between growing up in a society and wanting to be in a culture. And in my day, I was saying, I don't think the U.S. is the United States or America, basically North and South. The United States is a culture, because how could you have Mickey Mouse and McDonald's as a culture? Comparatively. And why are we being, ostracized? Is because of the consciousness. Now, recently, I hear people coming about in all kinds of writings, but like I said earlier, 30, 40 years ago, when I was very young, this wouldn't be happening. You wouldn't be talking about this. So the consciousness is here, but it's still being led by the ships that are still coming. And I think what it is that we are talking, my friend Vanessa, she said, it's a, hospicing modernity language. That's not going to be able to live with the earth much longer, because it's bringing superiority, and we have this way, democracy and things, and this is not a political thing. How could you politicize the earth? And that's the culture that the society, they had to see young people like Connor come out of and look for that searching. And that emptiness type of, right? But we're trying to fill this thing up rather than understanding the fulfillment of the Chante. Yeah, so probably a wide sweeping statement, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's something that I've always felt, is that gap of what we're presented with, I think, as culture, and this genetic and epigenetic awareness, to only be a generation or two removed from that embracingness of community. And I think of your community not only being your human community, but as you talked about Mini, that thing that I think we're often not able to celebrate collectively, that really creates an emptiness. That ability to rejoice alongside those other nations of beings, our more than human relatives, in our commonality, which is not only is everybody in this room 70% water, mostly just being animated by the thing that they drank this morning and yesterday and throughout their lives, but so is everything else. And I think often about that word oyate, and the way I've heard it translated repeatedly, and maybe most sits with me, is as a nation. And I think when you truly embrace that nation idea, the way that brings sovereignty to everything's right to exist, for the Chan Oyate, as we said, for the standing ones like that to be a nation, right? So when we, go to pull the boards down to make our house out of the logging a forest, do we consider that as as a nation with as much right to exist as we do, and perpetuated mostly in its existence by the same thing as us, you know? And how would we feel, or I think maybe how is it that we are able to exist while feeling the weight of that, but not having a language collectively to communicate that, right? Like we think about all the hubbub in the news and the constant headlines of the past few years of the invasion of the Ukraine, right? But what about our continued invasion in order to perpetuate our way of existence into all these other nations of the world? And you know, where does that factor into our models? You know, you think about a model like capitalism, which is going to need infinite resources to continue its existence. But we call them resources instead of lives. And I think that's something that really like quickly causes that shift in me, that stomach to drop, something I've always felt when they say, oh, you know, you got to go get a job, you got to do this. I'm like, I think I'd rather just be a skier.
Yeah.
Because there's that sense of, I think, responsibility that is collectively shirked by like a model which doesn't allow us to embrace our obligation to other things that are simply just, you know, elements animated by water and the commonality that we share with something, you know, like a tree or an elk or any other piece of nature. And so I just, that's a thing that I constantly wonder about is, you know, is that something that's just encoded in the genes, the yearning to once again be able to live up to our obligation to you know, Tiokasin, to all of our relations. And so, I don't know
that's so beautiful, though. I mean, thank you for saying that. Midakoye oyasi, right? It's much more than all my relations. And you really look at the words and string it out in English. It actually talks about a consciousness and not just of you in the center, because Black Elk said the center of the universe is everywhere. And so how could we own everywhere when we don't know who we are in place? And I deal with other indigenous speakers like the Irish speakers, you know, and how they yearn for their people to return. I speak with people from Australia, and all their people are returning, want to return, because that separation, that trauma that's so trendy nowadays to talk about in workshops, is that your separation from the earth is the trauma no one wants to talk about. We only keep it in the human context because psychology can control you that way, and you have to pay for that or get paid for it. But so the psychology of the earth, what is it? Where does it begin? For me is like, oh yes, so the creation story, which is a long story, I won't say it, but Midakoye Oyasi actually means to recognize the creation as creating. And to understand that what it took for human beings to have this form, of course, you can understand in your Bible or whatever that comes from. Fire, the water, the earth. These four elements, wind, they all had to agree to something. And this is why it's hard for Native people to go against the grain, so to speak, and say earth, wind, fire, and water have no consciousness, when that's all part of us. They are all intelligent consciousnesses that brought us together. But the difference is we cannot live in water exclusively, or fire, or in the earth, or the wind. We can't separate that. But how and why does all of those elements, intelligent consciousnesses, live within us? But yeah, it's easily, we can go extract them to make technology, as my uncle would say, techno-logic. But that's where we're going with it. It's like an endless train with no brakes. So let's go back to, not go back, let's understand where we are now. Consciousness now in the continuum. Midakuye Oyasi, we're talking first person with Earth. And we don't want to lose that rhythm by separating ourselves by saying the Earth. So we want to be here and deal with, you call it trauma, we call it rhythm. When I talk to the old folks back home, they don't have a word for climate change. What is that? Now think about that, feel that. What is climate? We're out of rhythm. And all we're doing is describing the Earth, right? But Earth as a mother, and you've heard this, is only reacting normally to an abnormal situation. So it's common knowledge, which you call wisdom. We have no wisdom. It's common knowledge, common sense. And are we doing that with Earth? Are we being with Earth? And so we become human doings, no longer human beings. So we have to look at this language, suss it out. Yeah, in that way, but I think Connor is on a good road to being a good human being. He's already, but to see Earth is defining his humanity, not some law or a creed or a religion. Earth is defining humanity. So you're becoming Earth. Becoming Earth, not part of Earth. You're all of that Earth. You're becoming Earth. And that's our job, responsibility. You talked about obligation before, is to learn how to live with Earth. But see, here's the thing that they will do, is like, what's your takeaway? When it's, what did you give away? Changing this language. You can do it. Connor's doing it. I'm still doing it. Energy can never be destroyed or created. It's never old or new. It's always present. This is the language of Lakota. And if I can rattle on for one more. Oh. In April, I visited with a group, 15 people in Sweden, in Gothenburg, Sweden. And they were talking about quantum physics and string theory. Someone was coming out of string theory, going into entanglement. And I presented to 15 people in a circle. And I started out with, at one time it was against the law for myself as a Lakota, as a Native person in the United States, to sit in a circle. It was illegal. And then they thought, wow, we feel honored. And so I said, yes, because you can do it. Now, you find everybody sitting in circles now, it's okay. But one more thing is so I presented to them, and I talk like this to them about more theory, whatnot, which we don't have the word for in Lakota. So I said, basically they came back. And he said, 2 days later, they came back and they said, we're sorry, but we don't have the language, we don't have the mathematics to understand what you're saying. We're not ready for it. Because I told them that your mathematics, your quantum physics is based in nouns. Ours is living verbs. So you may understand this a little bit more, because Einstein was trying to say this same thing. So Mitakuye Oyasi could mean E equals mc squared and beyond. Now, they have that consciousness that there is something different that's here already. Now, are you presently speaking the hospicing modernity language? I think that has to touch us here. Because I'm not trying to convince you with information. You can take it and run and not say, that's not practical, what Connor and Tiokasin are talking about. That's not practical. It doesn't need to be. Because what's been practical is not working. So if I've touched your heart and Connor's touched your heart, then maybe we're getting somewhere.
Oh.
So this is the point where Connor answers all the questions.
Yeah, do we have a microphone and some questions?
When you're talking about that yearning, and to be able to have something to yearn for, you know what I mean? You know that you're a Lakota. You know what I mean? I don't know. This is hard to say, but like, there's only so far back I can go, you know? So listening to y'all talk about the heart and all that stuff, it definitely resonates with me, but there's only so far back that me and other people like me can go. So how do we, what should we do to like try to connect with that, to like connect with the earth and kind of be a part of this? Because the only culture I know is English, and you know, we created, especially Black folks, we created a great culture like here in America that I'm proud of and that I connect with. But when I think beyond that, you know, I definitely want to think like, when you were saying that, I was like, man, that's cool. I would love to be able to connect back that far. So how do we do that?
That's a deep one. That's a good one, brother. You know, I think the only thing that I can say is that we go together. A lot of people don't know this, but actually before Jamestown, before the English came and they started settling, you know, around these parts, south of here and what's now called South Carolina was actually the first settlement of colonizers. And I believe they were Spanish. And they brought the first enslaved people from Africa to these shores. And when they did that, the indigenous people there were able to identify what was going on. And so the first experiments of enslavement of people on this continent like that, and of colonization, really, they actually failed. Because the indigenous people, they came through and they liberated those enslaved African people. And they left the Spanish, they left the colonizers to fend for themselves after liberating those slaves. And those colonizers, they had 160, I believe, people or so before their first winter. And they ended up sailing back on one ship with a single-digit number of people the next year. And so I think it's really important as we examine what are the models that will work to create liberation for people. And I think especially as we look at the ingrained white supremacy of the United States, of its education systems, of the fact that we're taught about Columbus, we're taught about the Pilgrims, but we're not actually taught about the first settlements that came to be here. Because they failed, because Black and indigenous people collaborated. And so I truly believe if you look at the parallels of things like AIM and the Black Panthers, and if you're not familiar, AIM is the American Indian movement. Guys like Russell Means and Dennis Banks were operating in a very similar style alongside people like Huey Newton. You know what I mean? And I think if we look at their commonalities in their methods and their approaches, that's really the answer for all of us, right? The Panthers, they were serving breakfast, they were serving lunch, and they were serving it to anybody who showed up. And I think therein lies the answer for all of us. is that, if our collective desires, greater than colonization, greater than capitalism, can come together, that's where our liberation lies as people. And I really do believe that that's the secret, is if we can learn to operate from the motives of, I want to feed people, I want to hold people, I want to be connected and collaborating with people. And my desire for that is greater than my desire to commodify the labor of someone else, commodify the labor of trees, of plants, of animals, of all those things. I think that's where our collective liberation lies. And I think if we can get to that point, right, where we just get to exist again, side by side, to be human beings instead of human doings, that the closeness of that way of life is what will bring all of us reconnection once again to who we truly were, and to bring things to the present and to the yearnings that we feel to who we truly are.
The other thing that I will add to Connor is, how many of you have a garden? Okay. Minikoju means plants by the water in one of my clans. So when I think about, okay, everybody has a garden. Like, where was their recognition that the garden was already there? Why did we take it out of the forest and put it in property? A separation. So I own a garden. I have a garden. So this is for you too. Now, here's what we can do. I feel that we can do is change the thinking a little bit, just tweak it just a little bit. So often I used to, when I was younger, talk to younger people and say, well, we have this thing called peace on earth during Christmas. Peace on earth. There's no word for domination in Lakota. No concept. So how do I say that? So I say, well, let's do it this way. If you say Mother Earth to third graders, they'll understand that. But if you say the planet Earth, they don't understand that. So it's relating the language once again. So if you have a garden, it's very understanding. When I plant a garden, right, I sing the songs for each of those. Those are 20, 30, 40,000-year-old songs, because they're in comfort, they're in rhythm, they're in vibration with Earth. And so I'm singing these songs, and what happens out of that, because I could tell you about a lot of things that did happen once you were singing these songs, but I won't go there. That's for a Harry Potter time, right? So how about if we turn that thinking around and say, I don't grow my garden, the garden grows me. Your intelligence, all of that ownership kind of takes backseat. And you learn responsibility more so freely. That's the indigeneity that you've been taken away from with this scientific, dogmatic language, domination. So if you are understanding where your intelligence comes from, what you eat, right? So I think that's what you're looking for, is the indigeneity. And how would you know this if we weren't here for eons before everybody came? Connor is younger than I am. I'm older than Connor. And when I die, like my dad and my ancestors, they go into the future first. And this is why we follow the elders, because they're ahead of us. They're not back there. So when we follow them, it's the same way with Earth. We follow Earth. She lays the example out. And so when you're understanding the time sequences of how long we've been here, then maybe everybody else besides Native people are very young. The applications of knowledge, information religions, very young. This is why we have a saying that you are our younger brothers and sisters. And we're waiting for you to listen, not to us. Where do we get our listening? Anagopta is anagopta, is that Earth is listening to us. Because we don't know how to listen to the Earth. And how do you do that? It's the same way the garden grows you. The Earth listens to you. Isn't that true? Provides you with all that you need to live. Water, food, warmth. All the time. Understands you before we even understand Earth. So when we look for indigeneity and I travel the world, that same question comes. When you take away religion, science, politics, Earth is not going to understand that. These are plans that came on the ships. So re-looking at that, understanding, looking again, it really means respect. Respect indigenous knowledge, indigenous what we do. And don't plagiarize it and put it in your books and make money off of it. Because you're really selling the earth. And most of all, you cannot save the earth. Let her do it. You all went through the same experience when COVID. You stopped everything. You had to stay indoors. You followed authority and domination. My clan didn't. We went out and we were doing our thing. None of us got sick. We didn't take a jab, nothing. Because we had ceremony with Earth telling us this big thing was going to change. It's going to stop everything. So Earth, for that year, came back. She was alive again. She started fixing the problem. And we saw that in action, but we soon went back to business. So one day, in Connor's time maybe, that these environmental consciousnesses or conferences, they don't exist anymore. Because we're actually living peace with Earth. That's what we have to do. That's what I think. Yeah.
Let's stay. Do you have time for another one? One in the back? Oh, yeah. Right there.
Yes. Thank you so much. I've really appreciated this. My great-grandfather was Yankton Sioux, and he was at an Indian boarding school. He was put there to beat the Indian out of him, right? That legacy in America of the Indian schools is a shameful thing for America. Another thing that I'm kind of concerned about is the cultural appropriation of regenerative agriculture, which is a lot of it is based on Native American ways of farming and ways of taking care of the land. Can you comment on what is the appropriate way for us to honor the regenerative practices that have been so long used in indigenous tribes in America, and how we could best respect that without basically stealing that?
So, okay, yeah. I mean, should I start from Columbus? Yeah. 500 years in 2 minutes. Okay. Here. I mean, if I could go ahead and answer that, if you have ideas.
You go first. I'll add a couple of things at the end.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the question? I get it. Yeah. So, cultural appropriation, who does that? Because you have no culture? Is it Mickey Mouse, McDonald's? So we're going to all put masks on during Halloween. We're going to baste the turkey. We're going to put up tinsel, and it's all become commodified, as Connor said. So what was before that? The indigeneity from where? I go to these places in the world and go immediately to the earth. I don't go to humans. I think part of this stealing we do to each other is to deny the fact that somebody else was there first. So can we be called thieves? I don't think it's that simple. So cultural appropriation doesn't mean changing the mascots of Washington Redskins to Commanders or whatever. I think it's really, you have to gauge for yourself what that really means. Did you ask yourself, whose way was this before? Why did we kind of spend two weeks with the native people and all of a sudden we became shamans? We know how to heal, but we don't give them the acknowledgement, recognition. We take yoga from someplace, another country, and then we Americanize it. So it's an American thing to always go place it out. It's extraction. In the box, go outside and you take it and survive in the box. So to end this for my part is that what came on the ships was a survival language, a surviving language, a survival language. And that's what I hear when I go to listen to very carefully. We are speaking in urgency and a surviving or a survival language. It's not living. It's in panic. Climate change. All these things. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you got to do this, and we'll measure it, and we'll do this. And here's a report, and it's all about this. Never really sitting down and understanding ceremony, understanding ritual, but ceremony. And that's what we miss. We can't appropriate ceremony. No matter what I say in my language, in our language of Lakota, I can't really truly interpret it. In other words, I can't give away any secrets because it's a living language. And I think that's what part of if we don't have solution in goals in Lakota, but that's all I hear is this is the answer, this is a solution, this is the goal. It's a project. Project Earth. Maybe it's the other way around. So just flipping things, right? Yeah, just flipping it around. And I think that's all I have to say because I keep seeing these time sequence thing going on.
I think we're on another timeline,
Yeah.
Instead. But what I would say to that, I'll do the regenerative agriculture part first, is I think from the most simple logic there is, regenerative agriculture will never work if you're trying to make money off of it. It's never going to happen. I'm sorry, to anybody in the room who's really attached to the thinking that there's a solution in that way. And there's a book I'd encourage a lot of you to read. It's called The Red Deal. And it's kind of this idea of what if we did a Green New Deal, but from the perspective of Indigenous people, right? And they talk about that in there, that we can imagine any revolution, right? This technological revolution, this green revolution, all these things. We can imagine any revolution but the one in which the land is returned to Indigenous people, right? And I think a lot of the answer lies in that, which is just that, if you can't imagine a world beyond the commodification of the gifts that you're given, you will never know how to honor those gifts, right? And that's what that is. For me, I eat a diet as much as I can of just Indigenous food. Primarily, I eat Tatanka, buffalo. And, I get it from folks who, they're ranchers, right? And they have they probably didn't vote the same way I voted and things like that. I can tell that about them sometimes. But it's really funny, they came to me and they said, oh yeah, we've been doing all this stuff trying to raise this buffalo, and it turns out you can't really raise buffalo. All you can do is restore the prairie, right? And that's the answer with all of this is we have broken the circle. We're the one piece of the circle that's saying we the food web that you learned in the 8th grade biology, right? We're the only ones taking something out of that circle and removing it from the loop entirely, right? The buffalo doesn't pay the grass to be eaten, right? And it never has. And that's why there were able to be millions of flourishing buffalo. So the second that you take the cow instead of the buffalo, right, and you're like, I can commodify this guy, I can, sell him, then you broke it, right? He didn't give his life to you anymore, you took it, right? And it's why you look into nature and, there's not vegans out there like, kill all the coyotes, they're eating other animals, right? Because it's a coyote's job to eat the other animals, right? And so I think it's that same thing is like, as long as we continue to remove ourselves from the circle, from the fact that like before we are consumers, before we are business people, before we are any of these things, we are a biological process. And as long as we're removed from that, we will fail every other biological process on our planet. And that's what's happening collectively, right? And we're going to get shrugged off by an organism that we are just a cell of, that we are just a cancer of at the moment, right? And so to tie that into the piece about the boarding schools, and I appreciate you acknowledging that, your great-grandfather was probably sent a very similar place that my grandfather was, right? And that's a hard thing. And I don't know that there's no remedy for that, right? I have a mentor of mine who's always like, you can't put the colonization cat back in the bag. You can't undo these things, right? But I think the real hurt, the real dishonor of it is from not learning from those things. And so for me, who works in these spaces a lot of times where people, I'm in the outdoor space and people want to know, how do we bring Native people back to this space, our ski area, or this or that? I think one of the key things that we have to focus on is not being more attached to the ideas that have gotten us into this mess than we are to the solutions. So an example in my own life is I'm a professional skier, right? But I've drawn a lot of hard lines and boundaries for myself, right? I don't do the helicopter skiing, right? And a big part of why that is just this different sense of values, right? Because so many other people in my space, they say, well, I'm a climate activist and I specifically focus on policy because my riding in a helicopter is just a drop in the bucket and we really need to focus on everybody else. We need a legislative change that's going to make this change, right? And I can see where some people come from with that and the wool they're trying to pull on my eyes. But I think the real thing is they are more attached to their ego-centric idea of being the professional skier, of maybe being the best one. That it's like, well, I need just one more helicopter ride in case it turns out I get up there and I'm the best. And for me, I bought my first pair of skis at 21. I never had a chance to be the best one. I never will be, right? And I'm okay with that. So what I've accepted is I would rather not be a professional skier on a planet full of people who are liberated or who are alive, who get to continue living, then I would like to be the last most famous professional skier before this whole thing goes down the drain. And I think that's what we have to look at ourselves in a hard, deep way and understand, are we more attached to America, to capitalism, to our specific business dream being a part of the solution than we actually are to seeing that solution come to be, right? And so for me, when I think about the residential schools, what is the cure for that? There will never be a cure in the United States of America for those systemic injustices which are built into its foundation. Whether that is the enslavement of Black people, whether that is the genocide and the removal of indigenous people from the land, America can never remedy that as long as it continues to exist. So I think we have to ask ourselves questions like, are we more attached to being Americans than we are to being healed?
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Just to go out here, as an uncle of mine once wrote. He said, he was asked, he said, this non-native came to ask him, he said, what was America called before we came? He said, ours. So we take it like that, because he had to answer in that vernacular. So when Connor talks about the political situation, the things haven't changed like relative to some crazy horse. We heard this. We pay attention to one native that says the things that we want, that you want us to say. We don't get to hear from those who are really living what you don't want to hear. So if understanding that way, I can take all of my knowledge of whatever degrees that says I have and take it back to the reservation, and it's not going to mean anything. So I think it's looking at our colonization of each other, getting over ourselves as humans and stop doing so much as humans and allow the human being, and always think, are we being anthropocentric first? Are we always putting humans above first? Above anything else? Because he also said, the Western world says that we are the epitome of intelligence. We're the supreme beings. But in the whole Lakota way, so we are the most ignorant beings on earth. Because it makes sense. See what we're doing to earth? So maybe all that patriarchal knowledge that you have needs to stop. Even the matriarchal knowledge that comes out of the patriarchal knowledge, coming, at war with each other. Always, maybe it's really about the war against the earth. War against earth. Policies, government, science, religions. Never recognizing earth. We're destroying earth. We're killing ourselves. So in that way, this is very serious, yet we need to understand that the humor has not left us. Because you can talk to us all day and we'll be rolling in our sweat lodge. We'll be rolling because who we are, what got us through is that spirit of this land. And it's going to continue no matter what's being done to us or to us or to the earth. And in that good way, I think you have been very patient and respectful for listening, sometimes hard, sometimes easy, sometimes what are they talking about? But it's understanding that I hear and I feel a great respect from you all, that if you are leaning to earth, she's leaning to you. And isn't that mother? It's not our earth. We belong to the earth. She doesn't belong to us. Let go. Stop using our country, our nation, our land. So, hey, but thank you so much. Hey, good job, Connor. Good job, Ben. Hey, good man.